May it please your Lordship, the President of the Constitutional Council and members, I'm not very comfortable, Mr. President, because the caution you are giving us is a good caution, but ought to have been given from the beginning. Other political parties had taken turns, taken days, held you hostage. But when it comes to the SDF and Joshua Nabangi, there's a hurry or there's a blackout. Mr. President, the field should be a level field. It should be a level playing ground for all the actors. For 2 days, one political party has been doing political rallies here. If we don't attempt to do same, then the game is not on a level playing ground, Mr. President. However, I do promise, I've taken the caution, I'll give you just the salient points, Mr. President, and members of the council. This is the first constitutional council of this country. You are called upon to write history. This issue of Anglophone Cameroon, Francophone Cameroon, if we go back memory lane, we will not find a place for it. If the Portuguese who came here first did not end at the coast by naming Rei dos Camarões, if the Germans who came in 1884 had remained in this country, all of us would have been speaking German. There would have been no question of English and French. But because the future of this country was determined by Allied forces after the First World War, in France, in a town called Versailles, in 1919, we now stand to talk of Francophone Cameroon, Anglophone Cameroon. Let's go back memory lane, Mr. President and members of the jury. It is inadmissible. Today we are talking of Ambazonia. Who are the Ambazonians? If the Germans were still in this country, are they not Cameroonians? They are Cameroonians. Just because they are a disgruntled minority, just because they are marginalized, just because they are not given a fair share of the national cake, and when they are pushed to the wall, they want to react, we don't want to listen. Mr. President, you asked a question here, a pertinent question. What if this August Assembly were to cancel the elections? Can it be reorganized? Mr. President, I read your mind. If that is done, Mr. President, it takes 2 days. It takes 2 days. If the head of state calls the representative of these Amber Boys on a negotiation table, on a foreign country where their security and liberty will be protected, Mr. President, they will go. Why do I say in a foreign country? Because their leaders are in Konengi. And why were their leaders out of the country? They were either marginalized back home, they were either discriminated upon because of their minority position. That is why they had to go for greener pasture elsewhere. We must be frank in all what we say, Mr. President. Honesty and truth is the right word. So, in answer to your question, Mr. President, we are saying, if we are sincere, all of us, and pass this message on to the head of state to open up for genuine dialogue, the elections can be reconducted within a period of between 20 and 40 days, Mr. President. That said, Mr. President, I come back to our expose. I'll go on the topic of fraud. Elekam, Mr. President, Minat, and CPDM are father, mother, and son. CPDM is the father, Elekam is the mother, Minat is the child. So you cannot separate the three of them. You cannot, Mr. President. I'll demonstrate to you. Elekam issues a register. Elekam issues a register. You have a polling station of Tuba. Elekam says that is on the 24th day of September 2018. Elekam issues a list of polling centers. On the first day of October 2018, Elekam issues another list of polling centers. And in the list of those polling centers, the 1st of October, they say Tuba had 3 polling stations, 3 polling centers. On the 24th of September, Elekam says Tuba has 2 polling centers. Why all these movements? This movement is because a 3rd polling center is created in the midst of the University of Bamenda in Asanji's Hall. Mr. President, I'll invite the bailiff to come and take the documents and show. On the 24th of September, the divisional delegate of Elekam issues situation of merged polling centers and polling stations in Mezam division as of 27 September. Tuba, 2, and Sub Hall and Health Center, Bambui, for 86 polling stations. On the 1st day of October, the regional delegate of Elekam issues an order. Tuba subdivision, 3 polling centers, GPS Bambui, Asanji Hall, Yuba, and GS Sabga. 6 days to voting. When was this communicated, Mr. President? The 3rd polling center was created as an organized plan of rigging, stuffing of those boxes. Mr. Bailiff, please hand this to the President. Those are documents coming from the person who is said to be independent and who is called upon to organize elections. And because he's the wife of the CPDM and the son of Minat, there's no complaint from any of them. No complaint comes from either way. That goes to further buttress the aspect of fraud, Mr. President. Mr. President, this issue of polling centers, it came from where? This code has nothing like polling centers. There's nothing in this code like polling centers. You talk of polling station. And when you merge polling stations into polling center, you disenfranchise voters. 1, the distances are too long. In view of the fact that there is no movement on election day, you expect, let me quote the example of Yaoundé here. The distance from Pinyin to Santa is like from Emana to BMRC. The distance from Pinyin to Santa in Mezam division is like from Emana to BMRC. Vehicles are not moving on voting day. You expect a voter, 70 years old, who is desirous to vote, to move from Emana to BMRC because he wants to express his, not only his desire to vote, his civic responsibility. Mr. President and members of the Constitutional Council, this is inadmissible. Elections were not only boycotted in the Northwest and Southwest, Elekam and the CPDM and Minad made it possible that the voters should not vote because they knew it was a stronghold of the SDF, it was a stronghold of Joshua Osi Nabangi. That brings me to another argument, Mr. President. We must be honest. And to show you how these three people, Elekam, CPDM, and Minat, are dishonest. The incumbent, Mr. Bia, candidate Bia, took over office in 1982. I was in secondary school, Form 2. The day Mr. Amadou Ahijo announced his resignation, we caught fear. There was no school the next day. We went there, our principal said, no, go back home. There's something wrong. The country is not itself. And on the 6th of November, when Mr. Solomon Tande Mona, the then speaker, mounted the rostrum in the glass house for President Paul Biya to take oath, the archives he signed, his names were Paul Biya, not Biya Paul. Even if his names had been changed to Biya Paul, from that 6th of November, the official gazette of this country carried his name as Paul Biya. The candidate I stand here and my other colleagues to represent, his names are Joshua Nabangi Osi. That's the order of his name since his national identity card. That is why the matter before you, Mr. President, and members of this August Assembly carry the order of those names. Because his first name begins with the letter J, if they were to put them alphabetically, of the 9 candidates, candidate Paul Biya will come after candidate Joshua Osi. The 3 accomplices will connive to change the order of names of the head of state from Paul Biya to Biya Paul. The question I ask, Mr. President, use your powers under section 107 of this code and let them produce the certificate of individuality of our head of state. Because the change of position of names entails you must produce a certificate of individuality. And these are tricks that are being played by Minat and Elekam and the CPDM. Mr. President and members of this assembly, these are things that are very, very painful. And these are some of the little things that make some people go wild. The name of this country, Mr. President, Federal Republic of Cameroon. It started with La République du Cameroun when East Cameroon had independence. When our parents came back from the block of Nigeria, it became Federal Republic of Cameroon. From then, it moved on to United Republic of Cameroon. And suddenly moved back to La République du Cameroon on the pen of a single head of state. What are we writing in history? What are we telling the world? That a country that in 1884 spoke German, not out of their making, suddenly speaks English and French because of the influence of France, Germany, England, Russia, the Allied powers that defeated Germany, determining our future without consulting us. That is the root cause of this English and French. And if we don't go down and erase it, the generations to come will not know. Mr. President, there was a curfew in the Northwest and Southwest before the 7th of October. And this quote in section 87 says, campaigns will last for 15 days. And for those campaigns to last for 15 days, there were 15 days round the clock. 24 on 24. And in the Northwest, Governor Lele Afrique had reduced the population of the Northwest to beyond birds and chickens. 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. was curfew time to 6 a.m. People go home and see birds flying in the sky. People are already home when chickens are coming in. It gave unfair competition, Mr. President. In the other regions, the campaigns were around the clock. Unfortunately, Mr. Eno Abrahams, the Director of Elections Cameroon, is not here. When we raise this issue in Bamenda, that it will be unfair for political parties to campaign, and it's against the code. Political parties plan strategies at night and execute at day, because you can't go to campaign in the night. Where do you get the population? And when you tell people not to move after 6 p.m., how do you expect them to plan their strategies? How do you expect them to campaign? Now the governor of the Northwest comes out with a circular on the 30th, restricting movement from subdivision to subdivision. I mean, you could not move from Bamenda 1 to Bamenda 2 to Bamenda 3. Further preventing the political parties from campaigning. Then when Mr. Jean Kwete comes to Bamenda under heavy military escort and is totally taken to the Congress Hall, he will defy the ethical code of these elections by saying, où sont les partis politiques qui disent ceci, cela. Mr. Bailiff, it will be important for the Constitutional Council to have a look of this communique. Again, the President and honorable members of this council, some of us love this country. Some of us like the unity of this country, but others don't. When Mr. Eno Abrahams came to Bamenda for a meeting, I asked him this question. Mr. Elekambos, how do you expect political parties to campaign in the Northwest and in the Southwest region when there's a curfew in the Northwest and there's a curfew in the Southwest? If they don't uplift this curfew, they'll be giving unfair competition to electors, to those who are expected to vote. While the other 8 regions are campaigning around the clock, you limit campaign time for those in the Northwest and Southwest. Tell the governor to uplift this curfew. And I thought he was going to tell the governor that, Mr. Governor, what the SDF is saying is correct. He turned and was rather begging the governor to please do something. Mr. President, which is higher? Is it a law enacted by Parliament or a circular signed by the governor? My teachers are in this panel. A constitutional law teacher taught me in the Yaoundé University, an act of a governor, a governmental order cannot supersede the law. It cannot supersede the law. When you impose a curfew, you give unfair competition. A circular of a governor goes above the electoral code, which is to the effect that it's a national law and must be implemented Mr. President, if we love this country, you and the members of this August Assembly can only do good to Cameroonians by asking us to go back to the playing ground. When they talk of the population of the Northwest and the Southwest not voting, what about their relations who are in the other 10 regions? What about the internally displaced people, Mr. President? Why are they displaced? Why are they displaced, Mr. President and members of this assembly? They are displaced because a group of the Anglophones think that they have been marginalized, they've not had a fair share, and because they have a right to protest and are protesting, they are not being attended to. As I said earlier, Mr. President, if the Germans were not defeated after the First World War, we would not have been talking English and French here. It would have been nothing like the Anglophone problems. Mr. President, the delegate of the sub-divisional commissions of Elekam, they were practically not functional. The bailiff report that we have given you, Mr. President, is evident. Go to Kwakwa, go to Manyu, go to Lebialem, go to Njinikom, go to Womb. The Lekam office in Womb was completely abandoned long before the convening of the presidential elections. The officials are not there. How do you expect them to function? How do you, Mr. President? Internally displaced persons are here in Yaoundé. They are in Douala. They are in Marwa. For the Prime Minister and members of his government to get to the Northwest, because of insecurity, they asked to vote in Bamenda. A divisional vote counting committee says no. You are not supposed to vote here, and they turn around the next day they are voting. We are in a state of law, but it seems we are not actually in a state of law, Mr. President. After all, one politician once said there are only 2 cubes of sugar, meaning there are 10 cubes and 2 cubes are insignificant. What a provocation. So if there are 10 cubes, 2 are very insignificant. Those are not the type of words to entertain, Mr. President. Those are not the type of words that a true Republican will accept. Mr. President, the document my colleague submitted to you there on polling stations, you'll find polling stations where nobody voted. 0000 to the end. Yet there's a procès verbal sign. There's a procès verbal signed. So the question that comes to mind, Mr. President and members, is who signed that procès verbal? When the law is clear that the elected member, representative of the administration, representative of each candidate at the polling post has a right to vote upon presentation of the electoral card. Why all this, Mr. President? Mr. President, this list issued by Elekam, reducing polling stations from 2,343 to 77 centers. That grouping on grounds of insecurity is not found in this code, Mr. President. It is not found in this code. I will call on the bailiff, Mr. President, to hand you the original copy of what Elekam and Minat did as far as the Northwest was concerned. That is, it tantamounts to disenfranchisement. When you move voters further away from their voting stations, you are discouraging them from voting. You are discouraging them from voting, Mr. President. Mr. President, the code is very clear as to the role of the subdivision of Elekam, where an additional list or an addendum is to be added on the electoral register. That decision must be signed by the Elekam subdivisional officer with its commission members. It wasn't the case in the Northwest and Southwest. Mr. President, with me here is a decision where the chairman of Revision Commission on the first day of October 2018 signed alone with no commission member, requesting that a list of security men deployed to Bamenda 1 be put on the polling station at the Regional Delegation for National Security. I will once again invite the bailiff, Mr. President, to hand you a copy. These copies, Mr. President, are for emphasis because an addendum of exhibits, which we had earlier submitted on the date of our petition, carries all these documents. This goes, Mr. President, to indicate to you and your members that the electoral floor, the field, was not level. The field was not level. If Mr. Philemon Yang, Prime Minister, gets to Bamenda, he is unable to get to Oku. He and 103 others apply to vote in Bamenda. What about the internally displaced? Who has the arms? The arms are there to protect the Prime Minister. Why were the people displaced? Why were the IDPs displaced? This is a crucial question, Mr. President, that we need to answer. If they who had all the security could not go to their respective areas to vote, you expect somebody from Tijani in Bello, who was shot, his two sons shot, his house burnt, and the wife is internally displaced with 4 children, living at Old Town in Bamenda, without an identity card, without clothing, without an electoral card. How do you expect her even to go and ask for re-registration? And Mr. President and members of this assembly, the voting population of the Northwest and Southwest, to my mind, is more than 1.7 million. We shouldn't consider only those who registered in the Northwest and Southwest. The number of Anglophones in Douala, the number of Anglophones in Yaoundé, in Garwa, in Betua, down to the south. Do you expect somebody who is in the south, whose relation has been shot in Batibo, in Ambo, where practically no life exists, will have the zeal to go and express his civic right? The answer is in the negative. The answer is in the negative, Mr. President. It is painful what we are going through. It is very, very painful. And for us, Mr. President, to have a fair and level playing ground, the best you, Mr. President, and members of this assembly can do is to annul the elections. Total annulment. It will bring peace. It will show love for fatherland. Hear the wordings of our anthem. O Cameroon, land of promise, our dear fatherland. Why can't it ring in the minds of Cameroonians? Listen to what the PM writes, Mr. President. The Prime Minister of this country, petition pursuant to Section 63 of the Electoral Code. We have the honor to petition your commission with respect to voter registration and revision of the electoral register as provided by Section 63 of the Electoral Code. The petition is premised on the following ground. 1, that there are many voters registered in different polling stations in the Northwest region and who are in possession of their voters' registration cards as provided by Section 64 sub 1 of the Electoral Code. 2, that because of force majeure occasioned by the current socio-political situation in the region, these voters cannot access their places of residence to vote in the upcoming presidential elections of 7 October. Because of force majeure. 3, that mobility within the region has been restricted by the competent authorities for security reasons. 4, that the impending presidential elections has a national constituency. 5, that the normal period for registration or revision of the electoral register elapsed when the Electoral College was convened. 6, that the concerned are voters currently residing in Bamenda 1, 2, and 3 subdivision. By reason of the exceptional circumstances mentioned above, we pray your commission for the following. 1, that you exercise your powers under Section 63 of the Electoral Code and order for revision of the electoral register following change of residence to Bamenda 1, 2, and 3 subdivisions. 2, that you empower the competent voter registration commission to carry out the relevant revision of the electoral register as provided by Section 83, sub 1 and 2 of the Electoral Code. We urge you to grant our application so as to enable the concerned voters exercise their fundamental civic and constitutional rights. Find attached a list of the voters concerned. Thanks for your kind consideration and collaboration. Chairman of the Northwest CPDM Campaign Coordination Commission, Philemon Yam. Mr. President, and he attaches a list. You have it there, Mr. President, of 183. The question we ask, Your Lord, Mr. President and members, there's no word in this code called force majeure. It's a clear admission that there was insecurity. And if there was insecurity in 2 regions of a country, which because of fatherland is one country, united, one and indivisible, then there was no urgency in the elections. There was no urgency for the elections. If the mandate of parliamentarians and councillors was extended, whose house was on fire, that a bill could not be sent to parliament for that of the president to be extended. Well, we're running away from the shadow. The reality is there. These boys are Cameroonians. They love this country. It is because their backs are on the wall that they think they have to fight. And Mr. President and the Assembly, if you want to save Cameroon, write history. Make history, Mr. President. My colleague said you are 11. You are 11 sound minds. Nobody will hold any of you responsible if you rule on this petition on your conscience, on the facts and the law. Nobody. Rather, you'll be paying a price for peace. We'll be looking for an avenue where we can build Cameroon. Mr. President, if this is done, I get back to your question, and we get to frank dialogue and call the boys from the bushes, they will come out and we build this country. On the documents I submitted to you, Mr. President, I quote a second example. If you look at Santa initially had 2 polling stations as of the document of Elecam of 24th September 2018. And by the 1st of October 2018, Santa had 3 polling stations and a third created in GS Akum. And the votes of that polling station of GS Akum were half the total number of votes in the other 2 polling stations at Santa. Mr. President and honorable members, you can understand why. That ballot, that station was created for a purpose. It was created by the 3 individuals, father, mother, and son. Yes. Mr. President, I made it sure that I take ethics. I promise not to be long. Minister Atanganji said, no, the government is ready. Let the boys come out. Let the boys come out and let's talk. Is that how people come out for dialogue, Mr. President? It is difficult to start a war. It is very easy to start a war, but difficult to end it. And no war in history has ever ended without dialogue. And no dialogue in history has ever succeeded without honesty, without give and take, without fairness, without frank talk. And when the war is over, we don't count corpses. We count the living. Mr. President, the question you and this August Assembly will ask is, only the Northwest and Southwest, what percentage would that have cost? In politics, Mr. President, we don't look at numbers. We look at the future. We look at where we are going to and where we are coming from. If that question were to be asked, Mr. President, you uphold the report of the rapporteur. But if this assembly were not to ask that question and look at the issues squarely, we shall be making history by cancelling these elections. Once more, Mr. President, for the sake of peace, for the sake of love for fatherland, I urge you and the members of the Constitutional Council to cancel these elections wholly and give Cameroon a chance. Thank you, Mr. President.
I'd like to invite Barrister.
Selon notre programmation, on va pouvoir suspendre l'audience qui va reprendre à l'heure que je vais indiquer.